Welcome back to the Growing Band Director Podcast. This is episode 100, and I'm here with my original mentor, Craig Skeffington, and we're going to hang for a little while. Skeff, how are you?
I'm well. How are you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, life's good.
Absolutely.
What'd you shoot today?
I shot 80. Yep. First round all season, no doubles. Pars, bogeys, and one birdie. So yeah, things are looking, they're looking up.
So that was for 18.
I did not walk off after 9. Yeah.
I had a student come up, Jimmy Kircher in Biddeford, and he's like, I shot Mr. Smith, I shot 63. I'm like, really? How many holes? 9. Okay.
Yep. So yeah. And it's funny because we've thought about doing this for a while now, and we just had the conversation. So I'll kind of set the stage for the people that are listening.
Both of them.
All 10 people that are listening, and I know you're making tens of dollars out of this. Yeah. So with regards to the podcast, I've said this to you before. I think the podcasts are brilliant because they fill a need, and you can see that with the membership as it grows and it grows and it grows. And being someone that's seen you since you were 15, and watch you develop as a teacher and as an educator and an all-around musician. Everything that you've done in our area in the state of Maine. And I thought it's a crime that people don't necessarily get to hear your view and your insight on this. And so for the people listening, I thought this is a moment where he needs to be interviewed. And so, because it would be awkward as heck to say, here's what I think about this, right? You know, people are going to clamor to that. So I think this is really important because I will preface this by saying I think Westbrook's program is like maybe the top 1 or 2 in the whole state, given the strength of the concert band, the jazz program, the marching program, Sue's chorus program. It's a very, very well-rounded program, and that maybe 3, 4, on one hand, certainly the amount of high schools in the state that do that. So you're to be commended for that. And so that, I thought this would be really important for people that sort of hear your take and your pedagogical, approach to things. So
now I'm nervous.
It'll be fine, I'm sure.
I don't know if I prepped for this.
Yeah. So I thought, because this didn't come, out of the blue, where as I know where you came from, but not everybody else may. And, give us a sort of a quick background. What led you to this point? I mean, what were the background situations that you said, I'm going to put that in my back pocket because I'm going to use that eventually. So walk us through, if you wouldn't mind, from the beginning.
Like my education?
Well, yeah. So what you had, in small steps, we don't need to know the minutia, but clearly there were high points of things that you said that was something I'm not going to do again, and that was something that I absolutely am going to use because it was brilliant. So that sort of thing. Well,
I remember being in high school and you came aboard, and I remember from you, you seemed to have fun working really hard, and we were very good, and that was kind of what inspired me. And when I got to a point where I was thinking about college, it wasn't a deep, I want to educate all these students. It was like, I want to keep hanging out in the band room because that's what I want to do. So it's like, and then you drove me down to my audition at UNH, got in there. Thanks to Clark Terry, because I don't know, we went because of the Clark Terry Festival.
Clark Terry Festival, I remember it very well.
So that was sort of my thought. And that was late in the game. I think it was March of my senior
year. You hadn't, I do remember that.
I had tried, but I had applied to schools because I liked the name. I didn't have any idea about what I was really doing. So, so I went there, and then second year in, Andy Boysen went there. There's, so many great teachers at UNH, and he was one of them. So from him, I was pretty inspired as far as how to rehearse a wind ensemble. And then after 4 years there, I decided to go back for grad school. And so I went there for a conducting degree, and what I was looking for was a place I could have podium time, a place where they'd, give me a TA-ship, give me some money. And what was the third one? Oh yeah, who I was going to study with was a big deal. So I was actually student teaching in Hawaii. I don't know if you remember that. I student taught in Hawaii.
I do.
And they all went on strike, including the university professor who was observing me.
Yeah.
So on a Thursday, I learned, oh, you're done here. And I got on a flight, and Monday morning I was in Dover with Michelle Belanger.
Wow.
So it was sort of I was kind of going away. My parents live in Hawaii. That's kind of how I was there. But then I was kind of called back here through that whole thing.
Yeah, it's sort of like COVID. It's like everything's shut down, and there's a new plan, right?
That's what it was for me.
Yeah.
So, and then it was okay, well, grad school it is, and I'm right here. And out of there, I got a job in Biddeford, which was, was a long and storied program, as we know, and there's so many great things about that town. Took over after Terry White and Tom Lassat, and some other teachers.
To the greatest teachers that we know, really.
Yep. and I had an eventful and fun 3 years there. Band did a good job. I reached a point where the way the schedule was at that point, I wasn't able to kind of take it past. I think we did like chorale and shaker dance, John Zadeklik. And not that it's all about difficulty level, but I was like, that was all we could do.
That will be the peak of what you were able to accomplish.
14 kids in the band class, and then 24 kids who came after school, and there was no other.
Well, and I think this is important too, because people that do know you, they see Westbrook and they think, oh, this is, it's a great program. They have no idea, because I remember I've been friends with Terry and Tom forever. And I remember thinking that program on the surface back when they were there, you would think that's really happening. And then, as you know, the schedule was just terrible. They didn't have, I think they had marching band as a class, but their actual band program met during like a recess or like it was 14 minutes, 20 minutes. I remember Tom.
That's when TL had it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really tough road to hoe right there. Yeah. So, and it went for a long time that way, right?
So that was sort of the end of it for me there. I just got to a point where I'm like, you know what? So I was actually going to go again to Hawaii. And move with my parents, because like free place to stay.
Right.
Honolulu. Like what could go wrong?
Exactly.
And then I met my wife just beforehand. And both the Westbrook High School and middle school jobs opened up at the same time. And we were on the atoll.
We were.
As I got the call that I got that job.
I remember that.
And I was like, well, if this new girl I really like and I both get these jobs, well, that's clearly a sign. And ding, ding, ding.
I do remember that. That's fantastic.
I also have a memory back from Biddeford, because I had just done, I don't think you were there, but the last conducting thing I did with UNH Wind Symphony was the Stravinsky Concerto for Piano and Winds with a faculty piano player in Chris Keys. And
this is for your master's recital?
In conducting.
I
honestly don't think I could flip from page 1 to page 2 right now, like with the recording. Like, it's like, where the heck are we? I mean, it's like a grade 40, 42 or something. And I went from that to the next August, like, okay, here's marching band camp, my new job, August 14th. I remember the date. And that first B flat scale we played, I remember it hit me like,
we're not in Kansas anymore.
Kids they can't just, I remember woodwind players just being able to play every run in the book. And it's like, it just is what it is. It's not that way.
No. Yeah. And that's funny, because that was, was that 15 years ago?
2003. 20.
Wow. That's amazing.
I just finished 20 years.
To go from there. Now, and again, I'll preface that because I've been around a long time. When you took over at Westbrook was sort of on the down cycle. I remember the marching band was on the precipice of folding for a little bit.
There was no marching band when we took it over. The year before they took it. And then there was a press release, or there was a camera, like the Channel 6 was called.
Right.
Because they wanted a marching band. And we were told by the superintendent on August 26th, you're going to have a marching band this year.
And that's such a tough thing, because we've had this conversation before, and Terry and other people, it's hard to have a marching band conversation or marching band program if you don't have a band program, right? And so you're forced to, like, you're putting Band-Aids out there, cardboard cutouts on wheels. And it's really, Westbrook is such a strong program now to see, but most people see that now and have no idea 20 years ago where that came from. Right.
Well, the first show we did was Latin Fire. We did like, I'm like, we're going to do bossa novas and pit the ensemble, and there we go. And we got a silver, and TL sent me a message like, that's a teaching job of the century or something like that. It was whatever. And I think we were at 27 kids, and that's with 12 in the guard. So like, that's not a lot of people.
You got to start somewhere.
And then the next year was 32, and then it was 37, and then it was,
What's been your high point?
Number wise? 72.
Good for you. Now, was that recently?
That was 2014.
So being a fellow marching band director, I mean, we follow the same. We were at 80, I think, at some point right before COVID, and then COVID hit. And last year alone, I think we were 39. So the rebuild from COVID, as you know, is very real, right? So I think it's, again, people see, it's a recency bias, right? We see what we see now, and some people are interested in, but they don't necessarily know. So you have to explain to them, this is, hard work that came to this pass.
It's hard work, and that's one of the things that I'm I guess worried about is the wrong word, but there's so many people that I talk to throughout the profession who are super young, either they're music ed students or whatever, and they don't understand that they need to work their tail off to grow something, and they're not going to have me time for a little while. Like if you're single or even married and you have no kids, and like, just do it.
Absolutely.
Unless you want your program to not grow.
Right. And for everybody has a different perspective and different needs, right? I like to think that not everyone comes in, I need a job, right? This is definitely not a job. This is a passion, right? And I'm reminded by it, I'm reminded with watching you teach now. I mean, I think, I hate to ask, how old are you now?
44.
44. Okay. So I remember still going strong at 44, but I started when I was 27 at South Portland. I remember by that point, I was already starting to think, this is a young man's game.
That's the year I started in Westbrook, 27.
Okay.
I was 27.
Yeah. I remember Bob Quinn, your predecessor. We were at a District 1 event. Norm Richardson, Bob Quinn, all the old teachers, and I was just a kid. I might have been 28 or 29. And Bob looked at me with that haggard face, kind of red eyes. He said, Craig, he hung his head. It's a young man's game. And just beaten and worn out. And I remember thinking, what's he talking about with the young man's game? It's just like, whatever, let's go, So, but, there's just the work ethic, the idea that you just have to, there's no easy fix, right?
And what was funny about Bob is that he had really high blood pressure because the kids knew how to
push his buttons. Yeah,
big
that's
time.
funny.
So apparently, they would. I wasn't there, of course, but they would push, and then he would lose it.
Yeah,
and storm off into the office, kind of thing.
Yeah,
and they were out of rehearsal for a little while, but he really let them kind of push him.
That's funny. I didn't know that. I knew how George would run his rehearsal, but I was closer to Bob just because Bob was a bit more personable to me.
Yeah.
But so. With that regard, in terms of running the rehearsal, we were sort of making notes beforehand. Probably your biggest influence in terms of the band program, symphonic band, concert band, was Andy. What sort of things did you pick up that you use now in your classroom?
Before I say that, I will say that when it comes to the jazz side of things, you're the biggest mentor I've had.
Thank you.
I mean, I don't rewrite as much stuff as you have over the years, but
you haven't had to. So you have better players.
So yeah, when it comes to the concert band side of things, I guess it's his approach of timeliness and effective rehearsal. There's no downtime.
Yep.
There's always, it's like you're on a treadmill, it's like he's moving and you got to move along with him. It's that proactive approach to rehearsal that, okay, I know what we're going to do and I can tell you the 10 areas we want to get to. But before I stop the band, I know what I'm going to say. And I know how I'm going to fix it and who the problem is and how I'm going to fix that problem.
Yeah.
And then, you work on it. You work on it twice. You work on it 3 times. At that point, you got to move. We all know where that threshold is in rehearsal.
Right.
We never
you haven't fixed it, but you've made it better and you've addressed it and you'll come back to it later, but you need to move on.
Yeah.
Okay.
And at some point, you're like, I'm not going to keep working with these 2 kids when there's 45 kids who are just kind of sitting here. So he was very methodical in how it was like the pieces were like a big puzzle to him. Or I don't know if he would say that, but that's the impression I got.
Yep.
And I would I just remember watching him rehearse and taking a lot of that to heart. He would touch the score throughout. He'd just touch it. And I would notice that at one point, even all the way from the back row when I wasn't goofing off or something. And I asked him one time, he's like, yeah, supposedly when you touch something, it creates some sort of connection with your brain about how you're going to remember that moment or whatever it was. So he said, that's something I wanted to come back and get in this sort of run through performance or whatever we were doing. So he would touch some stuff and then that would remember. He would do 4, 5, 6 things. Now you're teaching college. It's a little bit different.
Yeah.
The higher up, the older you get, but we would do a minute's worth of music and then he would fix 6 different things, 6 different ways, and then we go back and do the whole thing again.
Do you find that's the challenge for me now because I make this joke all the time, but it's true. Squirrel, pie, bikes. You're going through and you realize that stopping every 30 seconds is a drag for the kids. I remember when I played on Terry White's band, Terry would just run stuff, but this was Rick Gordon, Rusty Quinn, Ralph Norris, all these great players. We just go back and run it again. And if it didn't go well, we'd go back and run it again. But usually the players were so good by the 3rd time through, okay, I figured it out. We can move on.
Yeah.
But when I became a teacher, I would be I got to stop and fix it now. And that must have been terrible. That was my first year was, you were a sophomore. I don't think we made it out of the intro for September. And so I've learned over the years that I need to go and let kids play. But the idea is like, I got to fix that. I got to fix that. So you go back and then all of a sudden you're like, I can't remember what I was going to fix. I'm 56 now. And so I'm chasing those demons, more and more. So that idea of I'm going to touch the score, that's actually brilliant.
I will sometimes I'll even fold the page, or sometimes if I have a pencil ready, I'll just do a quick mark on it.
I have done that.
I always said, how do you know when to stop? And his answer was, when my brain is full. He's just like, I couldn't remember anymore, so I stopped to go back and get him. So I take that approach. Some people say you shouldn't play long segments at all. People we respect a lot, they say, nope, you got to do this segment, and then you're going to do that segment, and then they don't need to just play it all. And then I hear a lot of people, Terry and a lot of people other included, who say, the kids are in band to play.
Right.
Let them play. Yeah. So I guess I would fall somewhere in the middle of that. And I think there's times, I don't know if you're the same, but times when I do both. This is, this time of the season, whatever, we might be playing more chunks.
Yep.
This week, next week might be, we're getting smaller stuff.
John Neal gave me that. So it's like the cookie approach. Okay, the first thing we're going to do, we're just going to run it. It's god awful, but we're going to run it. And so I got you, everyone's warmed up. That's, and then we're going to come back. And within that, we're going to get really centered on these 4 bars. I'm going to work these to death. Some of you kids, I'm sorry, chill for a moment.
And that is effective. If you know you need to spend longer than you should, telling them ahead of time, hey, this is going to be a little bit.
You can shut it down for about 5 minutes. I need to fix this. And then we're going to come back and play again. So I think the bigger, our bag of tricks becomes much bigger as we get older. I remember Norm, who was a mentor, Norm Richardson. I'd be like, I'm not sure how much more I can do, and this is before Norm passed. He said, listen, stick it out. By the time you get, to wherever, 50, he said, you'll have so many things in your bag of tricks, it just becomes easier. And he's right,
That's the same reason Tom Brady didn't retire, right? He kept saying, oh, I figured the game out.
Yeah.
Like, why would I stop now?
Right, yeah. So, well, I mean, not that I would equate what we do with the Tom Brady, but I see the parallel. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's that rehearsal skill that you build over time by watching great teachers. I think that's really important.
Well, one of the things I picked up, and I drew this little picture poorly of an hourglass. Have you ever heard about the hourglass analogy in your rehearsing?
No.
So if you think about the top of the hourglass being bigger picture stuff, when in the first third or whatever of say you have 6 weeks to work on a piece, that first 2 weeks, you're kind of thinking about the big picture stuff. And then in the middle section where it gets skinny in the hourglass, you're thinking about the off on 3 and the balance here.
Yep.
And you're thinking about all the small things. And then over the last third of it, or give or take, you're back to thinking about dynamic contrast and, listening and all that sort of stuff. So, it's hard because so many concepts when we rehearse are all the time.
Yep.
Like, what day do you teach tone? Which day are you going to teach good sound?
Sure.
Which day you're going to teach a steady beat? It's like all of them.
Right.
But at the same time, some has to take precedence over the other.
Yeah. Yeah, it's global as opposed to, no, this is an F sharp when this comes up. Here's the alternate for it, but that's a good point. And so to kind of spin that forward, that's not necessarily dissimilar to jazz band, right? I think a lot of people pigeonhole it. They think, well, he's a jazz guy, or he's a concert band guy only, or that guy only does marching band. Well, in reality, teaching kids music is teaching kids music. It's just whatever. Do you like orange, blue, or yellow? I mean, it's the same. You're doing music.
And what does TL say? Jazz band is just concert band with a rhythm section.
Yeah. Seriously, tone production. So what do you find now? Like, one of the people in your past that people may not know from UNH was Dave Seiler. What did you gather from Dave? And Dave was very unique, and anyone that knows Dave that's in our circle, they're shaking their head going, yes, he was. But was there something on a pedagogical nature that you got from Dave that you use?
So what I remember the most from Dave, I don't remember it as much on a day-by-day rehearsals technique sort of thing, because he wasn't that kind of teacher. Like, I don't remember him being the problem solver type of teacher. But what he did great is he gave us experiences. So, like, how did he get Clark Terry to come and be a person at UNH? He just asked him.
Yeah.
And then year after year, the only reason we had all the people was because Dave always said they can only say no.
Right.
So we would get, Branford and, Ray Brown and Benny Green, like some of the heaviest people you could ever have, they were just coming through UNH because Dave just asked.
Yeah.
And I think once he got Clark, well, then it's a lot easier to get everybody else.
You have Tom Brady, so people are going to come play on your team now. Yeah,
that's exactly it.
Yeah.
So that's what I get out of Dave.
That's an interesting point. I didn't really think about that. So as you know, I was on Dave's Seacoast band from 91 to the present. And that same sort of thing. I mean, Dave had lots of silerisms, as you know, but now that I think about that comment, I think that's brilliant, because this is a true story. I had just gotten back from the service, and he heard me somewhere and called and said, can you help the UNH trumpet section? We're doing a combined concert with the Basie band. And so it was Al Gray, Mill Hitton, Snooky in the trumpet section, and they didn't need me, but he was just being gracious.
Yeah.
So, but that was an awesome opportunity. I stood beside Snooky in the trumpet section and split the shout chorus to Voduda, 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 Voduda,
Corner pocket.
Thank you very much. Just like going for it. And then he came back in and he's about 5 foot nothing, 100 pounds, and just abused me the second time through. And I just hung my head and I'm like, why am I here? Yeah. So, but again, I go back and I think I just got a chance to do, yes. So that's totally it. That's funny that you say that. And you've done that to a certain degree by kind of bringing people. And I know you had Maynard Ferguson at the school. Was it you were here? Was that before your time that they brought him up here?
Yep.
Okay. But you still, you bring in like Chris O or other people to come in and work with the band.
Right.
We've done that same thing. Like we've had all the major service bands come in, just ask, right? And so we had Maynard several times. And so that idea of like making that connection is so that like even the Portland Jazz Orchestra, my kids can come watch that because, hey, Mr. Skeffington's in it and it's cool to go do that. So it's an experience available to those kids that are in our circles, right? So
that's definitely something that you do better than I do, that whole bringing people in. I guess the extent of what I've done is in February, I have a concert that most schools don't have. Like I'll do one every 6 weeks of rehearsal. So we do one beginning of February, and we were going to do one at one point together. And then remember the snowstorm? We were like, we're not going to do that.
That's really unfortunate too, because I was looking forward to that. That would have been a good thing.
Remind me to tell the story about that real quick.
Okay.
But what I'll do is every year or most years I'll bring in a local college and have them play with us. And one year when UNH played, they did Rhapsody in Blue with their faculty piano player. And it was like, my kids are sitting in Westbrook, Maine, for free, watching this Rhapsody in Blue thing they're not professionals, but it's pretty darn close. And it was amazing. So that's something I've done a lot.
I think modeling like that is really, really important. And I've had some kids, like a couple of kids currently now that actually pursue, like PJO just played at Congress Square last week. And Bijan Watson, you know Bijan?
Nope. I know the name.
Boston trumpet player. Yeah. If you saw Bijan on the street, you'd like, that cat is a lineman for the Patriots. I mean, just big man. Gifted trumpet player. Just unbelievable technique, range, the whole 9 yards. He was our featured guest, and the outdoor concert at Congress Square was like 600-700. It was enormous. And I looked out in the audience, there was like 5 or 6 of my jazz band kids sitting together. I'm like, yeah, that's what it's all about right there. So yes, the idea that they seek it out on their own after you provide the experiences and they're like, wow, this is really cool. So I think that's important.
Just a story and this hit home. You had a phrase which you often do, that you used. We were going to do that concert, and if people don't remember, it was like the storm was coming in like 5 o'clock in the afternoon. They weren't canceling practices. They weren't canceling school. So it wasn't one of these, sorry, there's no school, we're not going to have the performance. And there was no snow date available. It was like, we're doing it or we're not.
Yeah.
And if for people don't know, your town is next to my town. So and kids were going to drive themselves there. So literally nobody had to drive more than 5 or 6 miles. But it looked like it was going to be a bad storm. And I remember saying, we might be able to get it in. And I remember you said, yep, we could get it in, but what are we proving? All we're proving is that we're willing to put the safety of our kids on the line to do this concert.
And when I was a younger teacher, I was all about, we're going. The bus drivers are driving it, we're going to go. And now if it's even remotely iffy, nope, don't want to do it. And I know the feeling. When I was younger, I'd put so much of my own personal time into it. And then as I got a little bit older, it was me and watching the kids and how much they've grown. We've got to go do this. And now I'm thinking, well, that's the end. but this is a TL thing. Enjoy the journey, right? So if you can't, and just reflect on what you did with the journey to that point, that's like the icing on the cake. The cake was the thing, right? So that was, and I remember, I think we were both in the situation then because MBDA was coming up. That was like a pre-MBDA thing, so we had another chance to be heard. So yeah, I do remember that. But the older Craig, my older and wiser is like, I'm unwilling to put kids, especially if we do a lot of local driving, so that's, you don't want a kid who thinks they know everything in a snowstorm driving a car. Yeah, that's just, there's no good thing comes of that.
That was the only concert that I had programmed and we had worked on, Prelude, Siciliano, and Rondo by Malcolm Arnold.
Yeah.
We were playing it and I was like all pumped to play it. And then we never played it.
What we were doing?
But for us, it was so early, and I had 3 other pieces planned for the end of March. So we never played that stuff. We just moved on to other
You're
stuff.
a planner, though. Like you'll go through and you'll like I'm sure that you have your winter program already picked out, and you do an October concert.
Beginning of November, and then a December concert where we combine the 2 bands.
Okay.
And then a February where they're separate.
Yeah.
And then the end of March, beginning of April.
And do you do a Pops concert at the very end?
We do an all-city concert where it's like 5 to 12 and 40 minutes kind of thing. I
have a list of tunes that I want to do, and then I will wait until I actually see what's in front of me, and then I will, the grade 4.5, that's out the door. Or we're going to be better than I thought. That one's on the table, and I'll cut it. I've learned over the years, I need to come into every concert with about 5 or 6 things, and I'm sure we all do this. Concert march, a lyric piece, maybe a motor impulse piece. Like if it's a front year concert or end of year concert, you might do like a Pops piece as well to just kind of throw the kids a bone, and have several versions, right? So there's nothing worse than being pigeonholed because I picked this show. This is what we're going to do. That never works, right? So
yeah, I will program. Like I think I have everything programmed for the year right now for all the groups. However, every concert will have at least one thing that ends up being changed, whether or not a group is better than I thought or worse than I thought, or there's another piece that I hear and it's like, well, I got to do that now. So again, I'll go back to the Patriots. Belichick always says, we'll draft a player if we don't just picture if that player is going to be good in our system. Is that player better than a player we currently have? Right? At least that's what they used to do. I don't know if they still do the same thing anymore. But it was like, nope, this player is better than Mike Vrabel. That's why we're going to get this player, and Mike Vrabel's going to go. Or something like that. So
sorry, Mike.
Sorry. So I look at pieces very similarly. Like I have this program I really like, and I really like that piece. Is that better on a program than something I already have? And if I say no, then I might still buy it, or then it goes on my list for what I want to do.
Well, here's the thought, like in terms of, people watching and they're kind of, maybe picking up some things about band repertoire and rehearsal. Where do you listen to new material and where do you purchase new material?
I purchased new material through Dale Perkins, and I don't know if you still use him or not, but
we do.
Yep. So if people don't know, you send your money to him and you get a little credit, and then you can just say, hey, I'd like this piece in an email, and then it shows up, within a couple of weeks. And supporting a local business is always good. Where I listen, I guess I would say everywhere. I mean, YouTube's huge, but people's personal sites and through the podcast has been really helpful because people keep sending these ideas for pieces. So like, if I'm going to put out an episode with like, here's 7, 8, 9 pieces people should listen to, I mean, I have a list of 20, and then I kind of have to select the ones there's been people who suggest a piece, and it's like, I listen to it and I'm like, I mean, it didn't do it for me. Not that it's not a good piece, but you can't necessarily do everything. So I try to be really picky.
For a younger teacher who might be listening, who are some go-to, like we all have, my jazz band list is this, my concert band list is this, of writers and composers that I've never played a bad piece by this writer. So who are like the top 3 or 4 if you had, grade 2 to grade 4.5 high school, who are your go-to writers?
We're talking about concert band?
We are.
That's a really difficult question because there's so many great writers, right?
I totally agree.
Yeah, and can I bail on it?
You can go deeper than your top 3 or 4.
Yeah.
You could say I've had great luck with, even if it's a 1-off or a 2-off.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'm really working on is using new composers because we all fall into. I love Brant Carrick, I love Andy Boyes, and I love Terry White, I love Carl King, I love Philip Sousa, and you could like literally do just that.
Yep.
But I'm working really hard on hearing some of these new composers and the music there. And I won't name the pieces, but there's some composers and pieces that everybody raves about. And I'm like, I don't see it.
Yep.
So I don't program that music, because if I don't like it, I can't sell it to the kids.
If it doesn't speak to you, then it's got to pass your test
finding
first.
the music that speaks to me, but also will fit my kids really well. Like there's a great chart. I don't know if you know it. Do you know the tune Celia by Bud Powell?
No.
It's a rhythm changes tune, but it's like a bebop thing.
Yeah.
And Mark Taylor did an arrangement of it. It's got this super sick trumpet solely in it.
Yeah.
And I've known it for 7 years. It's like, well, I'm going to buy that. And then one day when there's a trumpet section.
Yeah.
So if I listen to this, in 2024, there's a chance I've bailed on it. But right now I have it planned for like the end of the year, next year, to do with my trumpet section. So Mark Taylor's one on the jazz band side of things. Might come off, like you said, Terry White.
So we've had this conversation about jazz, and it's funny because we both agreed, came off Terry, Taylor. There's I've never bought a chart that didn't work.
Rick Stitzel.
Yeah. But in the concert band side, you're like, oh, I don't know if
it's
I want to go
hard.
there.
So I view it as I'm programming moods. Like I don't view it as I'm programming, like you say, march, slow piece, right? And motor impulse or focus piece. That's a lot of people do that. I don't do that. I do there are some times where it might fit into that, but because of that, I don't do enough marches. Again, that's an issue with my own programming. I have 12 pieces on every program I want to do. And it's like, you can't do them all. So I like to think about, it's almost like from an audience standpoint, I'm thinking about the journey that they're going on.
Yep. Brian Peter does that. He just talks about the journey that they're going. And I think that's awesome. And I think that's the difference with, I don't need to be you. You don't need to be who. It's just you do you. But I have to think of it in terms of categories. And so I listen to 3 or 4 marches and go, I really like that march. And so that's a category. I'm going to check that box. I'm going to move on. And, I tell a story that way. I'd like to think. And the other thing is I don't know how you feel about this. We're probably in the same vein. Shorter is better than longer. When I didn't really care early on, it was just like, if I wanted to do 7 pieces, that's what we do. And it was fairly soon after that, I'm like, whatever. I mean, why are we doing that? Right? Just because invariably the 6th or 7th piece might not be ready for prime time, but yet you do it anyway. So we try to do 4, maybe 5 pieces, and you might intersperse like a brass quintet, or maybe the jazz band plays a tune or something, but brevity is often preferred.
So recently, when I met the guys on Music Ed Insights, that podcast that I was on, so I started listening to some of their podcasts, 2 months, we booked it. And then 2 months ahead of time, I started listening more. So I kind of know how they run their show and all that. It's a great show, by the way. And they talked about an English curriculum. Like, do I want my kid in English class reading 12 books this semester, kind of, or do I want them reading 2 books, but they really dive into each book and what do they pull out of the character development? And I'm not a reader, so that's where my English language stops. But so do they want to learn less pieces deeply or more pieces on the surface level?
Sure.
So, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, but I thought that was an interesting way to put it.
Yep.
So I'm like you. I tend to do most of the time, I tend to do less music, and I try to do it really well.
Yep.
One thing I'm working on more is trying to improve what I'm teaching through every piece. If there's a piece and I'm like, what am I going to teach through this? Besides the notes and the rhythms on the page, sometimes another piece will speak to me and kind of bump that one off.
That's interesting. I often think, I'm a history buff, as you probably know, and I would love to get more into, as we're going through, especially in the jazz band thing, talk about the history, if the piece is a Duke piece or the piece is a bebop piece, like where the influences were. We did, and every time I talk about this, I forget, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, Mark's arrangement, which was a great tune. And I spent some time that season talking about where big bands in the 60s, broke from traditional jazz and did jazz rock because there was no audience and they were trying to. And so it's funny that kids generally don't want to talk about history. You talk about history and their eyes glass over and they roll on the back of their head. But I remember thinking, this is important. I'm going to share that with them. So that's an interesting point by you, that what can I teach other than the notes and the rhythms with this? I think that's a That's a good point.
You were asking about concert band composers, so there were two that came to my mind.
Okay.
And these will probably not be. I can't say I do a lot of their music, but again, there's so like you can almost do any piece, and everybody knows these names: Brian Balmages and Randall Standridge.
Yes.
I mean, there's a reason that I mean, I haven't heard anything of Brian Balmages that I don't like. I mean, this year I think I'm doing 2 of his, and they're both like grade 1.5 pieces, but they're just such great music.
Yep. Yeah, and so there's a good and a bad to that, right? Because the good is like this is the motor impo or whatever it is. It sounds great, and it's going to work. And sometimes they get formulaic, right? The great Sammy Nestico. Oftentimes you could hear a Sammy or Dave Wolpe, like it's just the same chart with a different title, but yet it sounds great,
right?
So I completely agree. So
I haven't found that with Brian Balmages as much.
Yep.
There's one I put on the episode earlier this summer. It was called "It's a 0.5 Beginning Band Piece on Mars." I don't know if you listen to that, but it's called "Bringer of War" after Holst.
Okay.
Brian Balmages did it. It is a legit. They don't just call it a 0.5. It's literally a beginning band piece. Okay. And it's Mars. It's freaking awesome.
Yeah.
It's so you're like, this is awesome.
Yeah.
And it's really a beginning band piece.
That's beautiful. Yeah. It's a level of genius for that. John Furman, who was a mentor of mine when I was a young teacher, he was on the staff that hired me and took a chance. Years later, before he retired, he said, "Why don't you write a 5th grade piece for me?" And he was like, "Yeah, it's got to be this." And I'd write something, says, "That's too hard." What? So, all the parameters that a grade 5, which is 0.5, grade 5, 5th grade, so I have actually, and I did like a ABA with a modulation and then a return. So it's like almost 2 minutes, which is probably like enough. I just have to figure it out. I shelved it for years during COVID, and I listened to it again, and it's clearly more than 0.5 or 1, but it's no more than 2. And I'm thinking, I need to finish that and send it somewhere as a grade 2 piece. But the idea that that kind of music is difficult to write, it's deceptively difficult to write, and I'm not sure everyone understands that. I mean, you do as a writer.
Michelle Fernandez says she was talking to Crystal at Allstate, and Crystal's like, "I want to do your music, but it's so much harder than my kids can play."
Yeah.
Like my kids are a 1.5 band, period. And she's like, "Yeah, it's impossible to write easy music." She's like, "I'll go and write something that's a grade 2, but by the time I get to the end, it's a grade 4."
Yep. Yeah, yes. And Mike Sakash was another, we were talking about that. You start on one level and you just can't, to keep that level that's difficult.
Yeah.
So maybe another thing, one of the things I'm not sure that we've shared or people would know, I think the chamber music and the individual kid as a musician is important to you in particular, because you guys have tons of kids that make the all district band, the all state band. So talked about that. I mean, where does that fit into your program in terms of like kind of pushing that agenda forward?
So chamber music is not as much as I want it to be. Usually once a semester, we'll do like a chamber music project for a week or so.
Yep.
And we'll use a lot of those flex band things that have been available for a long time, so the kids can be with their friends or whatever. And every time I hear our kids play chamber music, I realize how much they can't play, and then, so the more I do it, the better it is, but I don't do it enough. Again, that's a weakness of my teaching. I want to do that more and more. The reason I think we have a lot of kids who get into honor bands is a couple of reasons. One, they have to play the honor band piece for a final the year before. So my kids in the wind ensemble last year, they already know the piece for next year because we've worked on it a bunch. And so that's helped a lot. The reason we get so many kids into Allstate too is that, there's like lifer kids. Right. And then there's the kids who are casually in band.
Yeah.
In our town, any kid who's a lifer kid is a marching band kid. Right. And it's that way a lot of places. Like the kids just love it so much. They're part of the marching band. They're part of the jazz ensemble. They're part of the wind ensemble. I mean, they'd be part of the nose ensemble if we had the nose flute ensemble. But so there's like, yes, I want to do Allstate. Great. Go ahead and do it.
Yep.
And we have a lot of kids who don't get in, but just that it's a thing and it's an opportunity. And how many kids do we all have who are like, that kid's an Allstate clarinet player? They won't audition.
Right.
That's everywhere. So people who are feeling that, we all have that. But I don't know. I try to push the kids to do it, but I don't actually push them. Like I don't require that my wind ensemble kids audition. I've thought of that in past years, but So I don't know if there's a secret to it. I mean, we definitely do some chamber ensemble, and I try to teach to the individual kid.
I think I use chamber like as a ubiquitous term. I didn't necessarily mean that you're doing trios and quartets.
Yep.
Just the idea that you've got somebody willing, because that's a, pardon my expression, a very naked way to do it. It's like you're there, and like the kids don't want to audition,
Yep.
right? They're just like, they're scared to death of that.
Yep.
But we've been better. Like COVID was down to nothing. And I think that COVID year, we didn't have anything. And last year, I think we took maybe 12 kids. Used to be we'd fill a whole bus with the kids that were going to audition.
Yep.
But the chorus had 12. I think we had maybe 25 altogether. And I made a note. It's going in the right direction.
That's right.
And I think we have the same. So Crystal is your middle school feeder.
Yep.
Amy Anderson took over for Jean Quinn and Sandy Berry, and Jen Fletcher's there now, and they're sending tons of really motivated kids. So my job is to just hang in there long enough to see that, kind of back where it was, and then I can hand the keys to somebody else and walk out the door. But yeah, I wish more people took that more seriously. And this is another thing that I'll point out. You probably above anybody else have been a leader in the sense that you always volunteer to manage the district concert band. You manage the all-state band. You manage the all-state jazz band. And you've done that for 10, 15 years.
Yep.
So I know that's important to you, and not only with your kids, but in bringing in, really good clinicians for the event.
Can I tell you why? So I had a year in the first 4 years of my teaching in Westbrook. And there was just an experience that my kids had that wasn't as good as it should have been. And I remember there's a specific band kid who's now in the profession, and he came back, and the week after that group, he's like, I'm not going to try out for that next year. And this is a kid who, like, there should be no doubt they're in it. They just have to audition again. This kid loves it. It's going to be their life. And they said, this is just not, it wasn't a very fun experience. And I knew, and again, nothing against the manager. That's why I'm like not giving details. I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus.
No, sure.
But, like, you choose a conductor, you choose the music, and then you hope that it's the right fit.
Right.
But if there's somebody who's not ready to be the conductor, or the literature's not right, or whatever, the kids can leave thinking it's not a good experience.
Right.
So it was honestly selfish at first. I was like, I want my program to grow, and I need these kids to have a good honor band and all-state experience. So if that's going to happen, I want to see that that's going to happen. So I felt like the best thing I could do for the state and still try to do is, try to get the best people in as possible. When it comes to their programming, I try to guide them because I know like what the difficulty level should be.
The clientele, right?
But I also try to stay out of their way when it comes to the programming. I don't say, hey, do this, and I want you to do these 3 pieces. It's what do you want to do? And they'll say invariably, what's the program from the last 3 or 4 years? And then I'll send them that. And then I will listen to every piece, and I'll be honest, and I'll say, this one I think is too much, or I think this is whatever. So the program ends up being their program, but I will guide them along the way. And, I just felt like once we have great honor bands, whether it be all state or just regional bands, that just is the lifeblood to every program, and helps every program grow when it's that way. And it's, people think if you're a manager, and I've had this year, I'll just be honest, I've had years where I get a lot of kids in and I'm the manager, which means I'm kind of choosing the roster, right? Is the cutoff trombones 13 or is it 10 or is it 11? Like, those are decisions that, as you know, are really hard to make because you're like, my kid is number 13. That kid should go, but would I take that kid if it was from another school?
Right.
So those are really hard decisions to make. In fact, I feel like I've almost been harder on my kids because I don't want to appear as I'm biased towards the Westbrook kids. So some people might think, well, if there's a manager in your group and they're getting a lot of people in, they're showing favoritism. They're telling the judges to make sure you judge my kids better and all that. It's really more about if somebody's going ahead and they're putting in all that extra work for $0 to be a manager and to do all these things, odds are the work they show in that role is the same work they show every day in their program,
right? Which
is why it's a symptom, not a cause.
And I will say this, and I've said this for years, I rarely complain about anyone that volunteered to do something, because the easiest thing is to do nothing. In our profession, there's a lot of nothing. So I've gone to many meetings where you're just looking for, will somebody chair that committee? Crickets. And so I volunteered when I was a young teacher. You were in school, you were in college. We hosted the Jazz All-State for 4 years in a row because no one else would do it. I volunteered I ran I was the all-state jazz manager. I brought in Dean, a bunch of people from out and above, some selfishly because I'd had connections, but mostly because just no one would do it. So same with combo. So one of the things that I really like what I can see now is that there's a young cadre of teachers that are out that are volunteering for stuff now. In BDA District 1, there are teachers now that are making themselves available to host events or to manage things or to run the district level. So I like that because for a while I thought this is just going to fold up, so.
But one of the reasons I ended up managing so many different things, for about 5 years, I managed all four, the jazz and classical at All-State and an honors band. And one of the reasons I kept taking on each one, and I would convince my wife that it was okay to do this because I'm going to the festival anyway. Like, I'm going to be there.
Yeah.
I might as well have the clinician I want to watch work with the kids.
Sure.
And so it's a selfish thing, and in that, like we were talking about earlier with Dave Seiler, just ask who you want. I mean, it's amazing the people you can get.
Yeah.
I remember the day Alan Baylock was like, yeah, I'll be there. And I was like, really?
Yeah.
Sweet. And, you get some great people in by doing that.
Yep.
So any extra work that you have to do is usually during school anyway, and you can parcel it out. It may be 2 hours worth of work, but if you spread that over 4 months.
Ordering the charts or getting copies of the charts ready, that's the hardest thing, right? Getting the music into the kids' hands.
Yep.
So,
and I worked hard to think that I was organized so that when we had auditions, the program was already selected and bought. Now, occasionally you'll go, okay, we don't have a lead player for that, or we don't have that soloist. But typically we're pretty okay. And then I would get the music out sometimes within a week to the kids.
You were always good about that. That was the thing. Like as soon as the auditions were done and the rosters were put out for the people to see, you could expect the music in a week or two. That was never a strong suit of mine. It would be always like, what's the next thing? And I'd forget to do this. Or
the reason I always did ahead of time was because I had young kids, and I knew at any point I could be out a week because this kid's sniffling or whatever.
Yeah.
So, and I also felt like my job is not as stressful if I'm prepared.
Yeah.
If I've already done all the things, then if I feel like I'm ahead, I could literally not come this week, and next week I'd still kind of be a little bit ahead of the game.
Yeah.
So just that proactive approach usually helped me.
Yeah, that's probably across the board, right? With everything. It's not just, managing the district honors band. That's like being ready for concert band rehearsal or,
I also tend to be a little on the obsessive side, in case you didn't know that. And I work hard to know, like, that's something that I think has helped me be a good educator. I also have learned when to shut it off, because like when it's annoying, like around my family, I need to just let it go.
Yep.
But that sort of insistence on doing something the right way and planning ahead of time has been something that's been big for me.
Yeah. Well, it's obviously worked, because I circle back, the Westbrook thing is by far, I'll say this publicly. I think Cape has a very well-rounded program. Old Town, very well-rounded program. Your program, very well-rounded. And by well-rounded, I mean, there's not many that do the marching band thing and the jazz band thing. Although we don't do the string orchestra thing, but I would, any group that I'm not necessarily familiar with that does the string orchestra thing, they may or may not do the marching band thing. In fact, I don't think they do. So the fact that your program is where that is largely because of your work ethic. So
thank you. It's funny. I don't disagree with you in any way. At the same time, I think every community is also a little different. There's communities who send kids to all nationals and all Eastern.
Mm-hmm.
I don't do that. I should.
Yep.
But I don't.
Same.
There's groups who do the essentially Ellington thing. We're going to try that next year. We haven't done that.
Yep.
It's almost like you take your community and you try to improve it a little bit every year in the band. And
how have you found? I have definitely done this. When I took over, the jazz band always did this. Like one of the things, the jazz band always went to Norwood. And you remember doing that.
Oh yeah.
But you could set your clock by the events that they did. And so it was really busy. When you put the wall calendar that Music and Arts or David French give you, I fill those things out and I highlight them. And when you're done setting up your yearly calendar, someone might come in and go, oh my God, I had no idea you guys were that busy.
Yeah.
So have you taken a different, like you've said, I'm going to do this instead of that, or I'm going to add this. In retrospect, I've done very little adding stuff that's sort of out of that circle that Scavone and Richardson weren't already doing.
Yep.
So
I kind of think of each ensemble as a separate thing. So like I'll plan the jazz ensemble, what I think they should do through the year. And then I'll plan like the color guard. Not that I'm teaching it, but like we'll plan the schedule for the color guard and the schedule for the winter percussion and the schedule for the concert band and wind ensemble and the schedule for the marching band and all that. And then you kind of look at okay, these 2 weekends can't be a winter weekend because we have the UNH Jazz Festival and there's enough kids that do it, so we can't do that on that Saturday. So it ends up being pretty busy for sure. I've added a couple different things, like we talked about doing concert every 6 weeks or 7 weeks.
Yeah.
We did Symphony Hall once, which was really cool. And like I'd love to do the UMaine Day, but it's like in the middle of March. It's the hardest time to do it.
Yeah.
So, it's like
you'd have to cut something in order to go do that.
And the time that when as you do something enough, you start doing it the way you think is the best way to do it. And until something changes, you just keep doing it that way.
Yeah, and that's I circle back to Norm's thing about stay in there. The longer you go, the easier it is because you've done it. You've got a template for it. There's part of that. Although I will say this in my own defense, in our defense, that the creation of the winter percussion and winter guard programs has added one more element, and a big element, right? Because I don't know how much. I don't necessarily do any teaching. There's one year I helped out with the winter percussion, but I'm responsible for the buses and and paying everything. So managing that schedule has become, and plus it's your kids, right? So we do the same thing. Like, okay, UNH is this weekend, so you're trying to manage, because invariably you get the kids are like, well, I can't do this, and so they can't be in 2 places at once, right? So that falls on us to straighten that out, certainly.
It's the same way. I mean, I'm super lucky. I have Sue, who's our director of music. She orders buses. Jess Krupnick, who kind of does a lot of that behind the scenes work with all of our marching side of the program. Yeah. She takes on calendars and figuring out which show to go to and all that.
That's awesome.
There's a number of people who, and then obviously our teachers do all the teaching.
Yep.
So I'll manage. I'll say yes or no, or I'll manage it peripheral. But if I had to do it, we wouldn't have it.
Right.
I just don't have the
time. There's only so many things. No, I totally get it. That's why
I have a rule that I started probably 2012 or so, because we knew our second child was going to be born. And I said, I don't want to miss dinner ever. Now, Saturday night when there's a show, like nothing you can do about that. But throughout the week, I'm not going to be missing dinner. So we used to have marching band from 5:30 to 8. Well, now it's all right after school. And it was just selfish. I was like, I don't want to be out when my kids are home for dinner. So even in the middle of marching band season, we might have jazz band going and marching band and we're in school and all that. I'm home at the latest 5:45, 6 o'clock. And I'll come in, and if I'm at 6:15, I hear about it.
Yeah.
Because we said 6.
Yeah.
And that's helped me keep that balance throughout. That also with like being proactive and kind of obsessive. Like I don't wait to the last minute on stuff because it's just not my nature.
Yep.
So then I never feel like I'm in a panic because I feel like I've prepared for it.
I think it's circling around. It's a good life habit, right? So I get that. So I'm not sure, being the sub-host and you are the interviewee now, if we're at the point where we wrap this up, but I'm fascinated by this, just like hearing your take on things that I've done my whole life, but here's somebody else's approach in doing the same thing. And hopefully everyone else I didn't think about that. So
we're both screwed up.
Yeah. Yes, and so you're going to have to bring in a third party to straighten us out both, for sure. So anyway, I thank you for the opportunity. This has been great, and I'm really happy to share your message with other people that may not know.
We sincerely appreciate you taking your valuable time and listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. Your students are very lucky to have a band director like you. If you have any suggestions for episode topics or think you have an area of expertise to share on a show with us, please reach out. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe as well. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening to The Growing Band Director. See you next week.